The walls of the Ericsson Motors office were made of glass, giving the impression of an endless horizon where the city's skyline stretched into infinity. From the CEO's desk, high above the chaos of the streets below, the view was breathtaking, yet his attention was far from the beauty of the scene. In front of him, the latest performance reports of Ericsson Motors' most ambitious project lay scattered across his polished desk. A new electric engine, which had been touted as the breakthrough of the century, had turned into an unmitigated disaster. No matter how many times they tested it, no matter what adjustments they made, it failed. The engine would stall, overheat, or shut down completely. Time after time, they hit roadblocks that seemed insurmountable. The company had invested millions into this project, and it had consumed the last few years of development. It was supposed to be the future of the automobile industry, a cutting-edge electric engine that would revolutionize how people traveled. But after endless rounds of testing, the team had come to a harsh conclusion. The engine in its current state was useless. The once enthusiastic engineers now avoided the project, their once promising work now branded as a failure. Even the most senior engineers had thrown their hands up in frustration, declaring that there was no way forward. In hushed tones around the office, they referred to it as the impossible engine, a symbol of everything that could go wrong when ambition outpaced reality. The CEO of Ericsson Motors, Alexander Weller, was no stranger to pressure. His rise to the top had been marked by a string of successes, and he had built Ericsson Motors into one of the leading car manufacturers in the world. But this project was different. It had started with so much promise, and now it threatened to undo everything. He could feel the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders. Weller's frustration was palpable as he reviewed the numbers again. The latest round of testing results was no better than the previous ones. In fact, they had only confirmed what they already knew. The engine was fundamentally flawed, and they had no idea how to fix it. His mind raced as he tried to think of any last-ditch efforts, any way to salvage the project. But then it occurred to him perhaps it wasn't about the engine. Maybe the problem lay in the people trying to fix it. That's when Serena Miller came to his mind. Serena had been working at Ericsson Motors for just over a year. She was a mechanical engineer who had proven herself time and time again in the company's lower ranks, though her contributions had largely gone unnoticed by the upper echelons of management. Serena wasn't the kind of person who sought attention or recognition. She was quiet, humble, and almost always working behind the scenes. Her expertise in mechanical systems was unmatched, and her ability to solve complex engineering problems was legendary among her colleagues. However, because of her unassuming demeanor and the fact that she was a black woman in a predominantly male industry, most people, including the CEO, had underestimated her. Weller had seen her around, but he had never truly paid attention. She didn't have the flair or the bold personality that he associated with the engineers in his inner circle. But now, as he stared at the failed project in front of him, he wondered if she might just be the one to fix it. She had the technical know-how, she had solved problems that no one else could, and, perhaps, most importantly, she wasn't part of the group that had already failed. Maybe she had a fresh perspective, a new way of looking at things that could unlock the solution they had all missed. Weller picked up the phone and called Serena into his office. He didn't know what to expect, but desperation had brought him to this point. Serena arrived a few minutes later, walking into the office with the quiet confidence that she always carried with her. She was a woman of few words, but her presence was commanding. Weller could sense that there was something different about her, a calm intelligence that contrasted sharply with the frenetic energy in the room. She stood by the door as he gestured for her to take a seat. "Serena," Weller began, his voice tense, "I need someone to fix this mess. Everyone else has failed. This engine is beyond fixing. It's impossible." He stood up and walked toward the window, his gaze drifting out toward the city below. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, and his voice softened as he continued. "This project is everything to Ericsson Motors. It's supposed to be the future of our company, but now it's a joke. No one's been able to crack it. If you can fix this, I'll personally make sure your name is known across the industry. But I won't hold my breath. Serena sat still, absorbing his words. The CEO thought it was impossible, and perhaps most others in the company did too. They had all given up. But Serena wasn't someone who was easily deterred by doubt. Her mind raced as she considered the engine's design, the challenges it presented, and the possible solutions that might have been overlooked. The idea that something was impossible never sat well with her. Serena knew that true breakthroughs rarely came from doing what everyone else was doing. They came from questioning assumptions, breaking down barriers, and thinking outside the box. A faint smile appeared on her lips as she calmly responded, "Give me a week." Weller raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her confidence. He had expected her to show hesitation, or at the very least, acknowledge the difficulty of the task ahead. But Serena's response was simple and direct. She didn't shy away from the challenge. She was ready to take it on, despite the odds. With a nod, she stood up and left the room, her mind already racing with solutions. The next week would be a turning point, not just for the engine, but for her own journey. She wasn't going to let anyone define her by their expectations. Serena had always believed that every problem, no matter how complex, had a solution. Sometimes you just had to be willing to look at it from a different angle. As she walked out of the office, she took a deep breath. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was undeterred. The impossible engine wasn't impossible at all. It just needed someone who was willing to challenge the norms, push boundaries, and refuse to accept failure. Serena Miller was about to do what no one else believed could be done. She was about to turn the impossible into reality. A week had passed since Serena Miller had accepted the challenge of fixing the engine that everyone else had declared impossible. The atmosphere at Ericsson Motors was tense, as if the entire company was holding its breath, waiting for something extraordinary or disastrous to happen. The CEO, Alexander Weller, who had long since written off the project, couldn't shake the thought that there might still be a sliver of hope. Part of him wondered if Serena, with her quiet confidence and brilliance, might actually pull off the unthinkable. But that thought was brief. After all, he had seen countless engineers fail. What made her any different? Meanwhile, in the engineering lab, the rest of the team went about their work, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. Serena, as always, was calm. She worked quietly at her desk, her brow furrowed with intense focus. The hum of machinery around her was almost like white noise to her. It didn't distract her. She was deeply immersed in her calculations, her hands moving with purpose as she adjusted wiring, recalculated load distributions, and rerouted power flows within the engine system. Her concentration was so deep that she barely noticed the glances being exchanged between her colleagues, most of whom had already written off the engine as a failure. While others doubted, Serena had no doubt in herself. She had been in the industry long enough to know that innovation required persistence, and failure was not something to fear. It was simply a step towards the solution. She had spent the past week not just troubleshooting, but rethinking the problem from its core. Where everyone else saw an insurmountable problem, she saw an opportunity to approach things differently. By the time the clock in the lab ticked toward the afternoon, it was time. Serena, having spent long hours with the engine, was now ready to test it. She called the CEO and the engineering team into the testing room. The engineers, unsure whether this was going to be another failed experiment or a breakthrough, gathered in a tense silence. Weller, crossing his arms, leaned against the back wall. His face was a mixture of skepticism and faint curiosity. He had learned not to expect much from this engine, especially after months of failed attempts, but there was a flicker of doubt in his mind. Perhaps, just perhaps, Serena might pull it off. Serena, standing beside the engine, took a deep breath. She looked over at the team. "It's ready," she said, her voice calm and confident. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic build-up. She didn't need to make a spectacle of it. It was simple. She had fixed the engine. Now, it was time to see if it would work. With a firm, yet controlled motion, she pressed a button on the console in front of her. The hum of machinery filled the room as the power coursed through the engine. Everyone in the room held their breath. Seconds passed, and then minutes. The sound of the engine's internal components shifting into place echoed through the room. And then it happened. The engine came to life. It wasn't a sputter or a hesitant start. It was smooth. It was steady. The power output was stable, the voltage fluctuated within normal limits, and the engine began to hum with a precision none had ever anticipated. The impossible engine, which had failed time and again, was now running flawlessly. The room stood still, except for the subtle but unmistakable sound of the engine performing its first successful run. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the room was frozen in time. The CEO stood wide-eyed, staring at the engine. He could hardly believe it. His mind had already written this off as another failure, but now, right in front of him, the engine was running flawlessly. He turned his gaze to Serena. She was standing with a quiet, satisfied smile on her face. Her expression was calm, almost as if she had expected this all along. Weller took a few steps forward, his mouth dry, and finally spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "How did you do it?" The question wasn't just about the engine, it was about everything. How had she cracked something so complex that no one else could? How had she, the engineer they had all underestimated, unlocked the solution to what seemed like an impossible challenge? Serena took a moment before answering. She didn't rush to explain. She didn't need to boast. She simply stepped forward and began speaking in a steady tone, her voice measured, yet confident. "It wasn't impossible," she said calmly. "It was just misunderstood." She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. The issue wasn't mechanical. The problem was in the system's energy flow. The engine was too reliant on a specific electrical configuration, which made it unstable under certain conditions. It wasn't the parts themselves, it was how they interacted. The design flaw wasn't with the engine's physical components, it was in the electrical routing. She went on to explain in greater detail. "I reworked the power routing, adding a failsafe that would balance the load across multiple channels. This ensured that if one part failed, the rest could pick up the slack, maintaining the engine's stability." Weller stood there, his mind processing what she had just said. He had expected her to give him some complex explanation involving advanced mechanics or cutting-edge technology. Instead, Serena had done something simpler. She went back to the basics. She didn't just tinker with the engine's design. She rethought the entire approach. She had taken a step back, stripped away the complexity, and found a solution rooted in simple engineering principles that others had overlooked. "The real key," Serena continued, "was that I stopped trying to overcomplicate things. Sometimes the most elegant solution is the simplest one. I went back to fundamentals, to what works." The room was silent for a moment as the engineers and the CEO processed what had just happened. And then, as if on cue, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't just the engineers who were clapping, it was Weller too. He was still stunned, but he couldn't help but recognize the brilliance in front of him. Weller walked up to Serena, extending his hand with a mixture of admiration and respect. His voice was softer now, filled with awe. "I was wrong. You've not only fixed the engine, you've revolutionized it. Thank you, Serena." Serena shook his hand, but her smile wasn't one of triumph or pride. It was a smile of quiet satisfaction. She didn't need the accolades or the applause. For her, the true victory was in the work itself. The journey of solving the problem was what mattered most. Being underestimated, being doubted, it wasn't something that frustrated her. It fueled her. It pushed her to prove that what others saw as impossible was merely an opportunity waiting to be seized. As the engineers continued to celebrate, Weller took a step back, his thoughts racing. Serena Miller had just proven something far more important than the engine's success. She had shown him and everyone else that true innovation wasn't just about groundbreaking technology. It was about persistence, about going back to basics, and about believing in yourself even when no one else did. From that moment on, Serena's reputation spread like wildfire throughout the company and beyond. Her success became a story of inspiration for others. especially for those who had been underestimated or overlooked. She had shown that it wasn't about the titles or the recognition, it was about the passion for solving problems and the willingness to never give up. In doing so, she had turned the impossible into a reality, and in the process, she had earned the respect of the very people who had doubted her from the beginning. Serena Miller was no longer just another engineer at Ericsson Motors. She had become a symbol of what it meant to challenge the status quo, to push boundaries, and to prove that nothing is truly impossible if you dare to believe in yourself. As Serena Miller's story proves, sometimes the most powerful breakthroughs come from challenging the impossible and believing in yourself. Her journey serves as a reminder that no matter the obstacles, innovation and perseverance can change the world. If you're inspired by this story, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more incredible tales of transformation, ambition, and success. Join us at Expect Stories for more stories that inspire and challenge the norms. Subscribe now and become part of a community that believes in defying limits and rewriting the rules of possibility.